Well, good evening, and welcome back to another evening of lecture. I guess evening, I assume you're listening to this at night, but the beauty of this program is that you can certainly listen to the lectures whenever you like. So let's move on to Chapter 3, Illness and Injury Prevention. So let's get this all ready to go here. All right. Some of the objectives we hope to cover in this chapter include describing the incidence, morbidity, and mortality of alleged unintentional events. We're going to identify the human environment, the socioeconomic impact of alleged unintentional events. We're going to identify the role of EMS in the local, municipal, community prevention programs and identify situations where you can intervene in the preventative manner. We'll document the primary and secondary injury prevention opportunities. We'll recognize ways that culture plays a role in injury patterns and identify some national resources available for injury prevention data, strategies, and activities. Now, in 1996, NHTSA published a consensus statement on EMS's role in primary injury prevention. And within that document, it listed specific areas of injury prevention that all EMS providers should be involved in. It also discussed how to protect EMS providers from injury themselves. As we know that if you're injured, you certainly can't take care of people. And it talked about what sort of education on injury prevention we should be offering the EMS community, and addressed how EMS should actively participate in injury preventative initiatives. And when you think about it, EMS is the eyes and the ears of the success or failure of injury prevention initiatives. If certainly there's legislation that's enacted that says texting while driving is illegal, and you continue to see multiple collisions in your area that involve texting, that information can be shared with people who can in turn make a difference. Injuries occur as a primary injury and a secondary injury, and the primary injury prevention addresses keeping the injury from occurring in the first place. We talk about trauma and our trauma system and those sort of things, and one of the successes of our trauma system involves preventative strategies to prevent these unnecessary injuries from occurring in the first place. And they include things like bike helmet rodeos. Certainly if we've got children out there practicing good riding habits, wearing helmets, that sort of stuff. Car seat checks to make sure that the car seats are appropriately installed in motor vehicles. Talk about proper seatbelt use, because in motor vehicle collisions, if your seatbelt's not down and across your pelvis and is worn improperly, it can cause serious internal abdominal trauma. And then things like tougher legislation on DUI laws, on texting while driving laws, those sort of things. Those all help prevent injuries from occurring. Because, we look at those people who die within the first few minutes following their injury, they're either going to exsanguinate or they're going to have a massive axonal brain injury or a massive brainstem injury. And we really can't do anything for them on the scene except prevent the injury from occurring in the first place. Now, secondary injury prevention includes preventing further injury from the already occurred event. And we see this especially in head injury management. If somebody takes a gun and is playing a little Russian roulette and shoots the frontal lobe out of their brain, we can't do anything for the injury that occurred to the brain other than preventing it from happening in the first place. But once you arrive, your focus then is on preventing secondary injury of the brain tissue that's still viable. And that includes things like, monitoring and managing end-tidal CO2 levels, pulse oximetry levels, and blood pressure. And then making modifications to a person's home after a fall is a good example of secondary injury prevention. If you are in the home, certainly you may see loose rugs, no handrails on stairs, steps that are in need of repair, poor lighting. All those things can easily be corrected, and when the patient returns home, prevent that fall from occurring a second time. When we look at injuries, it is a major public health problem in the United States. In fact, it's the leading killer of ages 1 through 44. You're more likely to die from a traumatic injury if you're between the ages of 1 through 44. It causes about 150,000 deaths annually. 33 million emergency department visits occur, and you can imagine the number of people that never seek help for maybe what they believe are seemingly minor injuries following trauma that go unreported. As I'd mentioned, it's the largest public health problem in the United States today. It costs billions of dollars to the taxpayers. And you know, the sad thing about unintentional injuries is that 40% of them are preventable. You know, years and years ago, we used to refer to motor vehicle collisions as motor vehicle accidents. And the insurance industry has dropped that terminology, accidents, because there are very few true accidents. Most of these things can be prevented by, you know, doing things like slowing down, don't drink and drive, wear helmets, proper, you know, seat and lap belts, you know, those sort of things would prevent injuries from occurring in the first place. And then when you look at a cost of trauma that's difficult to measure, would include things like the years of productive life for that patient. You know, you look at your trauma patients, and typically they're young, and as a result of them being young, if they suffer a serious brain injury that ends them up in a nursing home, then you've got the entire rest of their life where you know, they're not productive. And you look at the financial impact of family and healthcare in general. There are families that go bankrupt, you know, caring for children that have suffered unnecessary traumatic injury and survived. And then you look at the financial impact on the community. You know, the cost of certainly healthcare, but then you look at insurance costs. You know, depending upon where you live, your insurance rates vary, and those insurance rates are directly related to the type of claims that are being filed in that particular area. And then again, something that's unmeasurable is the emotional toll that unnecessary trauma injuries as well as trauma deaths that do occur. We just can't measure the cost of that emotional toll. Injury is defined as damage resulting from acute exposure to thermal energy, mechanical energy, electrical energy, or chemical energy. It can be defined as unintentional, meaning the person had no intention of coming in contact with that electrical wire. It could be intentional, as in the case of a jumper or somebody who attempts suicide using a weapon. Injury risk is looking at a real or potential hazardous situation that puts an individual at risk of sustaining an injury. And certainly there are jobs that have a higher injury risk. You know, there are activities that have a higher injury risk. And then when you look at injury surveillance, that's the actual collection, the analysis, and interpretation of the injury data that is being collected. And I can tell you that, you know, in Iowa, we're just now scraping the surface of the injury prevention efforts with Iowa's trauma system. We just learned last year through injury surveillance, looking at the data that has been inputted by the 65% of the Iowa services that are reporting their trauma patients to the state, that on average, for those patients who are critical and need to be transferred to a level 1 or level 2 trauma care facility, Iowa EMS providers are spending on average 17 minutes on scene, and that does not include heavy extrication. You know, and we look at the golden rule, the golden hour for trauma surgeons, and we scale that down to the platinum 10 minutes for EMS providers, and we're well over that. So we got to ask ourselves, you know, through injury surveillance, what are we doing that is slowing our, or I guess making our on-scene times too long? Epidemiology is the study of causes, patterns, prevalence, and control of disease. Mortality rates is just another term for death. A mortality rate is the number of deaths due to a particular disease or a particular injury divided by the total population. So you could get, you know, 10 in 10,000 is the mortality rate, meaning that for every 10,000 people, 10 people can get this disease or can die from trauma. Morbidity rates is just another term for illness, and a person can have several comorbidities simultaneously. So morbidities can range from Alzheimer's disease to cancer to traumatic brain injury to heart disease, diabetes. You know, there are people that certainly might have COPD, a heart attack, hypertension, diabetes, and those are all considered comorbidities that increase their risk of dying should they suffer an insult. The cost of injuries is a major burden to our healthcare system here in the United States. It you know, relates in higher taxes. It relates in higher health insurance premiums, and it certainly again is something that you can measure is the potential life lost in years. You know, if an individual at 18 years old dies unnecessarily as a result of a traumatic injury, you know, and the anticipated age of retirement is 65, well, I'll make the math easier. He dies at 20 and 65. He had 45 years of potential life lost. The reasons that EMS folks should be involved in injury prevention is that as an EMS provider, we are widely distributed amongst all the populations, and we do reflect a good makeup of the community. And in rural settings, at times, EMS providers are the most medically educated people available. In the United States, there's 840,000 plus EMS providers. In Iowa, there's about 12,500 plus EMS providers, and we're widely distributed across the state. You know, it's estimated that 80% of the EMS providers in Iowa are volunteer, but they only serve 20% of the population. So 20% of the EMS providers are actually serving 80% of Iowa's population, because 80% of Iowa's population lives in urban and metro areas. Some other reasons for EMS involvement include EMS providers are well trusted. We are high-profile role models when it comes to injury prevention. It certainly should be our goal. We should be a champion of healthcare. We are welcomed in schools. We are welcomed in civic organizations. You know, they want to hear from us. They want to know what they can do, not only to help us and help with funding and those sort of things, but you know, they're open to hearing about injury prevention initiatives. EMS has a duty to respond to illness and injury. When that pager goes off, we have a legal duty to respond to illness and injury. And as we see what's occurring in our communities, we certainly can draw conclusions as to how to prevent these injuries from occurring. we've become, sort of authorities on injury prevention. And I believe that, having a duty and being an authority, that we also have a duty then to prevent these illnesses and injuries from occurring. It isn't that we're going to prevent them always. It isn't that, boy, if we step up our injury prevention measures, then our call volume is going to go down, and that's going to affect a lot of things, and that's just not the case here. There's a lot of stupid people out there, and they're going to continue to do stupid things, regardless of what we do to try to prevent those illnesses and injuries from occurring. But we have a duty to do that. Some of the leadership activities, our service directors, our state and federal EMS directors, should be preventing illness and injury to us, the EMS providers. And there's a wide variety of things that certainly people do. Services require us to have immunizations. They require us to get flu shots. Some services require regular daily stretching and exercise. They require annual tuberculosis tests, all kinds of things to help prevent us as providers from becoming ill or injured. They provide personal protective equipment on our calls to prevent us from getting a bloodborne pathogen or certainly becoming injured in a situation of a building collapse or a heavy vehicle extrication. Having available to us some of the turnout gear or helmets or gloves, things that would protect us. Encouraging safe driving strategies, drive cams in the vehicles that if there is a rapid acceleration, a rapid deceleration, a sudden swerve, the camera in the vehicle records front, back, and in the cab that for a period of up to 10 seconds before the swerve and 10 seconds after the swerve, giving leadership invaluable information on the driving skills of their EMS providers. Having policies within your organization that say, you should only drive, or you can only drive, 10 or 15 miles over the posted speed limit. And this is a statistic I found interesting, that 1 in 5 responders are injured every year, and some of them are injured so severely that they never return back to the job that they love. And, reducing injuries to EMS providers will ultimately allow healthy professionals to be available to care for ill and injured patients. Some of the essential activities that you as an EMS provider should, be part of is daily prevention efforts, exercise, proper sleep and nutrition, knowing where your personal protective equipment is, that sort of stuff. And then most EMS providers can name types of injuries that happen repeatedly in their communities. We all know that intersection that's really tricky, and a lot of accidents occur there. And we certainly, through petitions and those sort of things, can get the Department of Transportation to change the flow of traffic at those particular intersections. We can look in the homes of the elderly for stairs that have inadequate handrails, rugs that slip, knowing that falls is the leading cause of death in elder patients. So we should be really aware of that, as particularly if we're called into the home of an elder patient who has fallen. And once identified, programs then can be put in place to help reduce injuries in these populations. If we look at the epidemiologic triad, the triad is 4 legs of a triangle and involve many different factors. But the 3 factors that we can focus on in this injury triad include the environment, the host, and the agent. And if we can break just one of these legs of this injury triad, we may be able to prevent illness and injury. Another thing to consider is certainly that if we use a circle technique instead of triangles, and we've got environmental issues that cause injuries, we have host issues that cause injuries, we have agent issues that cause injuries. And if we focus on this area here in the white, where all three of these circles intersect, if we focus on these factors, that's where we're going to achieve our greatest outcomes. And also appreciating that, different factors cause illness and injury, and understanding which of those we can change. Now, the Haddon matrix deals with the pre-event, the event, and the post-event situations of an injury. And each square of the matrix represents a possible intervention point. If we look at the pre-event, things dealing with the host include the driver's age, their judgment, the host's physical condition. Are they tired? Are they impaired? The host's experience. The agent in the pre-event includes the condition of the car, the safety features of the car, and then the environment pre-event includes things like road hazards, road conditions, distractions in the car, whether they be texting or eating or bending down to pick up CDs or things like that. Now, when we deal with the actual traumatic injury, the host, things that affect the event include safety devices used. Did they have a helmet on? Were the seat belts on and properly applied? And then the physical condition of the host as well. If they have comorbid factors, if it's an elder patient with multiple medical conditions, during an injury, they're not going to fare as well as somebody who is younger with no comorbid factors. If we look at the agent during the event, that includes things like how fast they were going. Were there loose objects inside the car that became missiles? Was it a head-on collision, a rear-end collision, a T-bone collision? And then what interior surfaces were struck? The environment during the event includes what other vehicles were there? Which object was struck? If you fell, what did you land on? EMS typically deals primarily, when you're talking about injuries, in the post-event stage of the Haddon matrix. Pre-event is prevention. During the event, we have not a lot to do with that, but we get called post-event, and certainly upon our arrival, things that we should consider about the host concerning injury is how old are they? What is their general health status or their medical history? And what type of injury are we dealing with? And the agent that we should consider certainly might include things like how long has it been since the time of their injury? And is there secondary injury occurring, and what can we do to prevent that? Some environmental issues concerning the post-event in reducing injury include how long it takes us to get to the scene, and then how long we're on scene. Some other injury prevention countermeasures that EMS can be involved in is to prevent the initial creation of the hazard. Try to reduce the hazard that's being produced, prevent the release of the hazard, slow the rate of release of the hazard. Many of those things, preventing the release, slowing the rate of release, reducing the hazard being produced, those may not be as much EMS functions as they may be a hazmat team's function or a fire department's function. Separate the hazard in time and space, provide protection from the hazard with a barrier, modify the hazard, increase strength and resistance against the hazard. Increasing strength and resistance against the hazard might include getting regular immunizations, wearing personal protective equipment, minimizing the damage done by the hazard, preventing secondary injury from occurring, stabilizing, repairing, and rehabilitating the damage that's done. So these are all injury prevention countermeasures, and EMS, may not actively be involved in all of them, but certainly there are some that we do have some control over. We also have to look at something that's known as the EP5 matrix. And the 5 E's of injury prevention include education. And education occurs with a target population. Certainly if we're concerned about the number of injuries that we see involving texting, then the target population are those people who text a lot. Some engineering issues include an effective product device for use, with or without these engineering controls. Enforcement includes things like legislation, regulations, litigation, behavior modification, and enforcement is very difficult to accomplish. If we say, as an example, texting is illegal in Iowa, but it's not a primary reason to pull somebody over. So it's very difficult for this legislation to be, for them to carry out, for law enforcement to carry out the legislation. And behavior modification is that's the host. The host is the person or the one that has to change the behavior, and that's an extremely difficult thing to do, to make somebody change an ingrained behavior. The environment includes changing the environment, making it a safer environment, reducing the potential risks in the environment. We're back to rugs that don't slip, and solid rails on the stairs, and good lighting, and those sort of things. And then EMS has a role in this 5 E's of injury prevention, certainly by participating in injury prevention programs, whether they be car safety seat inspectors or bike helmet rodeos, or talks on the importance of wearing seat belts and not speeding. And then you're the watchful eyes of the injury prevention initiatives. You can see whether or not the initiatives that are in place are working. And if they are, great. If they aren't, then we have a duty to report that so that those in leadership can address it. The 5 P's of injury prevention include problem, and we identify the problems of injuries that are occurring by sorting through the data. As we look at data that's coming in, we found a problem. EMS providers are taking too long on scene with life-threatening critical injuries. Program, that's another P in the 5 P's of injury prevention, and it includes implementing the intervention and evaluating it. Partnership, EMS cannot do this alone. We have to be in collaboration with our legislators, in collaboration with certainly law enforcement officers, and those sort of things to make these injury prevention initiatives work. Preparation is getting ready for implementation of the new law, rule, that sort of thing. And then policy is the actual law that addresses the issue. Now, education only affects the host. That's who we target when we talk about education. Certainly the person that could sustain an injury based on their behavior, they are the ones that need the education. We don't need the education because we know the importance of not driving fast, not drinking and driving, and the importance of wearing helmets and those sort of things. Engineering is most effective if it's automated. If the host has to use a particular device and it's complicated to use, they just won't use it. But if the device is automated and they don't really have to put much effort forward to use it, then they're more likely to embrace it. Enforcement, that's always paired with education, and then the issue becomes compliance, getting people to comply to the rules and regulation. And the environment, certainly changing the environment in which injuries occur can help break that injury triad as well. EMS, we talked about the role of EMS and how important it is that we're actively involved in injury prevention initiatives. Another E is certainly economic incentives. You know, if a person, you know, there are some people that are really, they don't think that it's ever going to happen to them, so they don't want to hear that part of the problem. They always wear their helmet. They always wear their seatbelt. They're not concerned about that. They're more concerned about how the community as a whole, their insurance rates might go down if all these unnecessary injuries that are really expensive are reduced. And then being able to evaluate your injury prevention initiatives to see if they're making a difference is something that EMS can be actively involved in. Now, a teachable moment is one of those things where if somebody falls and breaks a wrist while rollerblading and isn't wearing wrist guards, that's an opportunity for you to do a little bit of teaching, the importance of wearing a wrist guard and how it may have prevented them from breaking their wrist. Patient care comes first. We certainly don't want to be applying a teachable moment prior to taking care of the patient. And the other thing is that you know, teachable moments work best if they're preemptive before the injury occurs. Again, educating people on the proper use of seatbelts, slowing down, not drinking and driving, that's an important teachable moment rather than actually immediately after the event. Because at that point in time, they may view your attempt to educate them on how this could have been prevented. They may interpret that as you know, you're demeaning them or you're patronizing them or you know, you're better than they are, those sort of things. And so it may not work at that time. Some really successful injury prevention initiatives include Kids Don't Float. It's a life jacket loaner program where they hang these life jackets outside. They provide water safety education to kids about the importance of wearing life rafts when around water. And what they did notice in comparing life jacket use before and after the implementation of this program is that life jacket use increased by 119%. And with that, you can imagine that you know, the incidence of drowning or kids drowning decreased. Stay alive from education or the safe injury prevention. This had to do with teens not wearing seatbelts. It involved paramedics providing hands-on educational programs, and it's something that's provided in Florida. 55,000 students attend these programs annually through their schools, and it just, you know, it's one of those programs where you address wearing your seatbelt to keep you inside the vehicle, to keep you safe, that sort of thing, and what can happen when you don't wear it. Some cultural considerations, and you know, there's a wide variety of different cultures, and certainly I'm just gonna touch on two. When we're dealing with Latinos and Hispanic children, when it comes to injuries, if you look at Latinos in general, the leading cause of death in Latinos is motor vehicle collisions. And when you look at Hispanic children, you know, they are less educated, or certainly their parents are less educated on car seats or proper seatbelt use. And it may have something to do with language barriers. You know, it's a variety of reasons why. You know, one might also be the Hispanics' strong belief in, you know, it's God's will, and they don't need to wear a seatbelt because if they're injured, then it was God's will. Here's an example of a EMS conceived program. It's called Safety Corridor. It occurred in Mount Hood, Oregon. And they developed road signs where accidents were common. They went out and educated the public. and they stepped up traffic enforcement in these areas. And when doing so, they noticed that accidents in these areas that where accidents were common dropped by 60%. Some other successful EMS conceived injury prevention program include the EPIC Medics out of San Diego, had a Safe Kids Coalition, and they reduced drowning by incorporating laws that required barriers be placed around pools. Another one out of, I believe, Oregon is Trauma Medics Talk Tough, Trauma Nurses Talk Tough. It's a seatbelt education program. And then, the campaign to discourage texting while driving through legislative bills which make texting illegal, billboards, and commercials. And then, something even as simple as the roadside crosses that we see in Iowa and other states that indicate a person died in that particular spot as a result of an injury. So in summary, a paramedic is in a position to actually decrease injuries, and we should engage in primary injury prevention with our leaders, with our decision makers, and our providers. We should all be involved in initial primary injury prevention initiatives. And in the United States, unintentional injuries is the leading cause of death in ages 1 through 34 years old. It's actually 1 through 44 years old. Unintentional injury is the leading cause of death. We defined what an injury was. We talked about what an unintentional injury was. We defined intentional injuries and injury risk. We talked about the importance of injury surveillance, collecting data and analyzing it, and then interpreting it so that we can draw some conclusions. And we need injury surveillance to plan, to implement, and evaluate public health practice. Measuring death rate is much easier than non-fatal injury rates, and that's because most deaths are required to be reported. So looking at things like mortality rates are easy because if a person dies, that's typically a reportable event where a non-fatal injury may go unreported. EMS personnel are best suited for prevention, education. We represent a broad spectrum in the community. We are welcome in clubs and schools, and they want to hear what we have to say. If a paramedic has a duty to respond to illness and injury, they also have a duty to prevent injury. Both the employer, the employee need to take responsibility for EMS provider safety, providing you the tools that you need to remain safe while on the job so that you can care for the sick and injured. Employers are required to have policies and procedures for workplace safety. OSHA has all kinds of rules and regulations concerning workplace safety. A teachable moment is something that you could do immediately after an injury, but it is more receptive prior to the injury occurring. There are different examples of EMS provider-driven community injury prevention programs that have been quite successful. To start your own injury prevention program, use the 5 E's: education, enforcement, engineering, environment, and EMS. Use the 5 P's: identify the problem, develop a program, work with your partners in your community, prepare it, enact a policy, and then review it. Should you have any questions over this lecture or any lecture that we cover, you certainly can reach me at this address or on the bulletin board for Iowa Western Community College, your webpage for the paramedic course. And with that, I'm done, and I'll talk to you soon.